Before we dive into the video, just full disclaimer, none of this is legal advice. Just happen to be sitting here with Jeff Welsh, who is a lawyer, and we're having a conversation, but none of this is legal advice, and you need to go get your own lawyer.
Absolutely, yeah. No, all I would say to that is that, look, we're here to help. The WebJoint team is here to sort of educate you on the space as much as we possibly can, but it's important to understand that every situation is unique and nuanced specifically, and that we're absolutely here to help. So feel free to reach out to the WebJoint guys or myself and our team, and we'll be able to help you. But please understand, we're going over all this at a very high level, and there's lots of nuance in every specific situation. So, yeah.
What is up, all of you cannabis aficionados? In this week's episode of Connecting Cannabis, we have probably one of the most multi-talented people on the face of this planet. Jeff Welsh is an attorney by day and a DJ saxophone player by night. Yes, you heard that correctly, and yes, he's pretty badass. But don't let the party side fool you. Jeff means business and built his cannabis law empire by representing some of the largest customers in the cannabis industry. Today, he's here to break down the complex laws behind cannabis deliveries, and as a bonus, he's even going to touch on how you can start your own cannabis company without even having a license. Did I miss anything, Jeff?
No, thank you so much, man. Pleasure to be here and excited to chat today.
Of course.
Absolutely.
So I always like to start by asking,
Sure.
How did you get into the cannabis industry?
So I went to law school in 2010 at Pepperdine in Malibu with the intentions of becoming a music entertainment lawyer. And it was in 2010 that I met the co-founder of my law firm, Luke Stanton. We ended up being roommates through law school, and he turned me on to the industry at the time. Back in 2010, there was no such thing as starting a legal cannabis business. Essentially, the role as a lawyer was form entities for your clients and keep them out of jail. We saw what was going on in Colorado, Oregon, and Washington at the time, and we sort of set our sights on post-graduation, starting a firm that was really focused on growing new businesses, working with businesses, and sort of acting as a general counsel, and anticipating the rush of what was going to be, the legal California cannabis business in California.
Nice, so 2010.
2010.
I don't even know if you could call that an industry back then in California. I mean, we've been in it since 2014 maybe, and I thought that was like ancient. Absolutely.
Definitely a little more like the Wild West those days, but a lot of those clients who are now major brands in California and throughout the country, frankly, already had a foothold in the industry back then. And so having that context, I think for me in particular and our team of lawyers really gives some unique value, to our clients because of the experience and time we've had in the California industry specifically.
Gotcha. Yeah, everybody take notes, every time I feel like it's like a recurring theme when I do an interview with somebody that's successful today, is they made their bets properly when it mattered.
Sure.
It's like you bet on an industry that you believed in, and the industry matured and developed into what it is now. Absolutely. And now you're in a position of success because of it.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that.
So who are your typical clients look like today?
Sure. We are currently the largest California-focused law firm that focuses on the hemp and cannabis space. So our clients, we sort of represent someone in almost every facet of the industry. We represent retailers, distributors, delivery services, ancillary companies, cultivators, obviously, manufacturers of products, entertainment properties, tech platforms like yourself, and also people that don't touch the plant, additional ancillary companies as well.
And who were some of the first clients that you had when you decided to kind of take the leap into the cannabis industry?
Sure. That was really, the differentiator for us was who we started to work with. So we formed the firm in 2015 after I had spent 2 years as a lawyer at William Morris Endeavor, which is a large talent agency in Beverly Hills. Our first 3 clients really sort of set the standard for who we would start to work with, and I really think helped us begin to establish a reputation for working with the best and brightest in the industry. So our first 3 clients were Henry's Original, MedMen, and Ease. MedMen and Ease we still have a wonderful relationship with. They've just grown so tremendously over the past couple of years that they've brought legal in-house, but we still maintain a wonderful relationship with them.
Nice, very impressive.
Thank you.
So we know, like in the city of LA at least, there are 100 retail licenses
Yes.
that are currently available.
Sure.
and there's going to be another 150 coming out next year. That's correct?
Absolutely, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So they haven't set a date for that second wave of 150 yet, because we're sort of dealing with this phase 3 process, which will happen on September 3rd. And I think the best practical advice I can give to all of our clients who's applying for phase 3 is get the best possible Ethernet connection that you can afford, because it's going to be on a first come, first served basis specific to when the applications are reviewed, but it's not a physical inline application process. It's going to be electronic only. And the difference in 5 minutes of turning your application in could potentially be the difference in whether you're number 10 or number 100 in the reviewing process. And so it sounds silly and goofy to invest in a fast internet connection, but that's actually going to be a crucial distinction in potentially the success of when that application gets reviewed.
Okay, that's actually perfect.
Yeah.
Because I kind of came in assuming that the big guys, they have their legal representation already.
Sure.
They have that part figured out.
Sure.
So I kind of wanted to answer get some questions answered for the smaller guys.
No problem.
So are you game?
Absolutely. Of
All
course.
right, let's do it. So I guess let's start with the basics. What do you need to prepare for in order to apply for a cannabis license?
Sure. I think first things first. I get a lot of calls from people who ask me that question. Understand which actual license type you're applying for, right? That's sort of the ground zero. So whether it's cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, testing, retail or non-storefront retail, that's the starting ground. Once you know which type of license or group of licenses you want to apply for, you then have to find a municipality, a city, that is issuing those types of licenses specifically. That search in and of itself, LA County has 88 cities alone in its county. The state of California has nearly 300 different municipalities, most of whom still have cannabis banned altogether. And so that actual search to find the city that is operationally desirable for you and also is issuing the types of licenses you're seeking can be a bit of a process and a time process. So once you've identified type and area, then you have to find a building that the landlord is either willing to sell or lease to you for the express purposes of the license that you're going to be applying for. And so you want to check, each city has its own rules specific to what types of businesses and what types of businesses can be there and what types of zones those businesses have to be in. And so that's sort of a multi-step process. Once you get to that point and you have either a lease in hand or like some type of an agreement, like a letter of intent or memorandum of understanding to have that building leased or purchased, if that license is awarded, then you can actually begin the application process locally. Once you have a local license in hand, at that point you then have to apply for the state license. You need both the local license and the state license in hand in order to legally operate in the state of California.
Okay, and from my understanding, local is kind of like the challenge, right?
Sure,
And then
sure.
once you have that, then the state is more like, it's more understanding that if the local government says it's okay, then we're probably going to say it's okay as well.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because at the local level, it's more challenging to actually find the license, right? At the state level, once you have that local in hand, you can apply, but the challenges that the state's dealing with right now are just frankly bandwidth and being completely overwhelmed with the amount of licensed activity that's taking place. And applications at the state level are several hundred pages, right? And so when you have a relatively new group of people who haven't dealt with cannabis or cannabis operators before at the BCC, they're doing their best, but the reality is they are short-staffed, they're overwhelmed, and this is far from a perfect process still. A lot of kinks are still being worked out, and so the local license ends up being somewhat easier, but the state license actually ends up taking a lot more time to process and receive.
And is it true that your license is attached to the facility?
Depends on the city. And so, in certain cities, the license will run with the land, which means that it's actually attached to the actual building it's on. In other cities, the license will run with the person or the entity that the license is attached to. And so, again, that's sort of a city-specific question, which it's a patchwork all over the state.
Yeah, a lot of them will be kind of city-specific because it does range so much. Like what one city says, it definitely could be much different than what another city says.
Absolutely.
And I have heard horror stories of people having to, buy the property.
Yes.
Right, like millions of dollars of property before they could even apply for the license.
Yes.
Because they're afraid if they rent it or lease it and they're gone, they want to leave one day, they just that landlord now has that license they worked so hard to get.
Exactly. And we've run into multiple unfortunate situations where the city requires that the license, is actually that they show an actual current lease or purchase, of the property itself. The challenge there is that, for better or worse, or for a result of a partnership breakup, things don't work out, and now all of a sudden our clients find themselves, having a valid lease in hand for 5 years, or purchasing a building that, depending on where it is, right? If you own a building in Los Angeles, it's probably going to have some non-cannabis upside, right? But if you own a building in, the high desert, right, Desert Hot Springs, Cathedral City, that building may or may not have, non-cannabis upside on the real estate side of things. So it can be a really, really tricky, process to maneuver. And you need to sort of make sure that that speaks to the importance of the team, understanding the vision, and having good relationships with people like your landlord, because that can be a critical moment of either success or failure.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare, man. But you're one of 1,000 applicants,
Sure.
and all 1,000 people had to get the property.
Yes.
But just statistically speaking, maybe 10%, 5% are going to end up actually getting that license. So
Sure.
What do you do with a 5-year lease after that?
Sure. No, and that's where, I would really, what I always sort of general advice to my clients, when they begin this process, is try to have a backup plan, right? With everything, that's like good advice generally, right? But, for these properties, if it doesn't work out, try to ensure that, and it could not work out for a multitude of reasons, right? A lot of times it has nothing to do with getting locally licensed or state licensed. It has to do with the partnership and the investor dropping out, or their operators no longer getting along, and so they split up. And so it's really, really vital to ensure that that asset has some type of secondary value outside of cannabis, unless you've already done this process before and you can execute, right? In which case, that secondary plan isn't as vital.
So on that subject of partnerships, I'm actually seeing a lot of cities, and again, it's city specific,
Right.
But some cities are doing this whole like social equity
Sure.
applicant thing, right? They're going the social equity route. Can you
Right.
explain that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, at a high level, the goal of social equity programs, most notably in Oakland and Los Angeles right now, the goal is to repair decades of wrongdoing that the war on drugs and cannabis has resulted in people of color, poor people, and people who live in urban communities. And so the goal of these programs is to begin to repair those decades of wrongdoing by helping to ensure that people who are poor or have been arrested for a cannabis-related crime, who live in high population density, low income areas, also receive the benefit of this new licensing regime, because in large part, our industry stands on the shoulders of these people who were willing to take the risk back in 2010, right, when I started working in this space where there wasn't legitimate cannabis business, and frankly, it was just, we called it earning your stripes, right? If you were a cannabis operator from 2010 to 2017, it was almost inevitable that you were going to face some type of issue with the law, whether or not you were operating in a compliant fashion at the time. And so that's the goal, right, of these programs. Implementing that goal effectively is extremely challenging. We're seeing sort of substantial delay, certainly in the city of LA, as a result of them realizing just how complex, doing this program properly is.
Got it. So it's essentially, if you were somebody that went to jail or, kind of faced consequences because of cannabis in the past,
Sure.
when it was quote unquote illegal or
Sure.
gray market, and now all of a sudden they decide, hey, it's completely legal and kosher,
Right.
That's completely unfair to you as a person, right? So that's kind of, certain cities' way of apologizing for that.
Sure, or beginning to rectify. Look, I don't think it's anything that they can just say, like, here's a license, everything's okay now, right? But it's I think acknowledging, right? Like where we're at with our country generally right now, I think a large part of all of this just boils down to acknowledging of the wrongdoing, right? And going from there, right? And starting to address that as well as we can. Just like the cannabis program at a state level, at a high level, to me is going to take, years and years to actually implement and effectively be implemented in the way that we all thought it would be immediately. And for these programs with social equity, I see it following a similar path, of it taking, years for this to really meaningfully get to a point that the program is running the way that the city and the people who support these programs think it should be. It's a process.
Yeah, definitely. Can you explain that a little bit more in detail as far as the social equity applications go?
Sure. So in the city of LA specifically, in order to qualify as a social equity applicant, you need to have been either arrested for a cannabis-related crime in the past, and also live in a low-income area of the city and need to be able to prove that. Specific to the actual application itself and the ownership of the social equity license sort of falls into several tiers. You either need to own 50% of the actual license that you're applying for, or there's another tier that only requires you to own 33% of the license you're actually applying for. One of the pieces of information I'll be giving you, which I'm sure will be available online, will be a specific breakdown of the list of requirements that you need to have prepared and ready in hand on September 3rd if you're a Phase 3 applicant. That includes things like a premises diagram, a valid lease, and other things, all of which will be available to everyone watching.
Definitely. On that note, WebJoint.com, if you go in, you put in your email, Jeff and his partners have graciously kind of given us a list of what you need, application requirements for social equity specifically.
Sure.
So we'll have that available on our website. So what it seems to me is that, a lot of this is very, very like city and or county specific.
That's correct.
So that's, rule number one, know the city, know the county.
Yes.
Are there any other kind of jurisdictions that you're dealing with? Like water and power, do they care, so on and so forth?
Sure, absolutely. So you're going to have to deal with, depending on the jurisdiction, they might have rules for a CEQA analysis. This is like essentially an environmental impact report, most of which is particularly relevant to cultivators, right, who have greenhouses and things of that nature. You're also going to have to you're going to be dealing very intimately with an architect on the build out of your facility, because you need to make sure that you get approval on all the coding from the fire department, from the Department of Water and Power, and other associations like that.
And how much time does this process usually take?
That's a great question. One I get asked a lot. At the local level, I'd say if you're moving extremely quickly, right, and extremely quickly means finding a municipality who's viewing the cannabis industry as a bit of a financial savior, right? I usually estimate if you have everything in hand that we talked about before, 4 to 8 weeks before that local license has been processed and turned around. It's really the state, as we sort of touched on earlier, that takes longer. Once you have that local in hand, when you go to apply for a state license, you usually need, my team would need, anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks to prepare an application to submit at the state level, and then could be anywhere right now from, 3 to 7 months is what I'm seeing. I know that's a huge sort of gap in time, but the reality is the sort of state's bandwidth ebb and flows. There are certain periods of time, just in the calendar year that are more particularly busy, or people are looking to apply faster. Obviously, with this wave of Los Angeles licensing, once these Phase 3 licenses have been fleshed out and have been received, the state's then going to get hit with a flood of state applications, right? And so that would be a particularly bad time to apply for a license if you weren't in LA, at the state level, would be, post everyone receiving, local licenses in LA. Because they're going to be particularly busy.
Right.
Yeah.
And apart from the time, how much money do you think people should be budgeting for this process?
Sure, great question. I get asked that probably more frequently than anything else. The legal cost, which I'll go into, is a fraction, really, of the overall cost. A lot of the sort of sunken costs that you're going to be looking into are non-refundable application fees, at the local level and at the state level, as well as, working with an architect and a design build out. Again, this is more specifically for larger facilities, right? It's not as relevant for, say, a delivery service, right, who might only need a 2,500 square foot, room, right, to sort of house all of their products in. But if you're building, a 250,000 square foot greenhouse, the cost of the materials and the architect to design that is going to be exorbitant. I usually say a great figure is around $250,000 all in. That's from soup to nuts. Beginning to finish. I've seen clients get it done for less than $50,000, but they brought a lot of they brought a lot of things to the table that helped cut their costs down. Whether they had an architect on their team or a lawyer on their team, things like that can really cut costs. Our side of things, like I said, is a fraction of that. You know, usually at the local and state level combined, all in for legal services like us ends up being somewhere between, you know, $15,000 and $25,000 all in. Now, again, there's exceptions to that because certain clients bring, you know, have people on their team that they'll bring to the table who've already prepared standard operating procedures and things like that, which are required for the local and state application, in which case, you know, obviously we're willing to work with them and help ensure, you know, that we're reviewing their application, but we're not actually drafting. And so again, there's a range there, but I would say legal ends up being 10 to 15% of the cost of the whole project.
And this is assuming that they don't even have to like buy the property, right? Because if they
Correct.
do, then
Important caveat, Art,
yeah.
For sure. You know, that figure is without real estate, you know, included from a purchase perspective, right? Vast majority of real estate you're looking at in the state is going to cost you 7 figures easy, right? And at that point, there's usually, you know, an investor on board unless the client or the applicant, you know, is self-funded. But at that point, you know, if you're going to be purchasing real estate, tack on 7 figures, you know, to that $250,000 amount.
Got it.
Or 8 figures, depending on the depending on what the location is, right? But yeah, that's sort of that elevates the cost of the project significantly.
And then once you finally have this precious license of yours,
Right.
Are there costs to maintaining it?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, it's a lot easier once you receive the license. A lot easier to keep it than get it. You know, there are, you know, the Bureau of Cannabis Control has allowed themselves the ability to sort of stop by and check in, you know, at their leisure with or without notice. They're really allowed to just come in and check it out. So it's important that you're sort of running a shop that actually follows the standard operating procedures that you said you were going to follow. Otherwise, you could be subjecting yourself to fines, suspension, or, you know, rescission of your license altogether. You know, there's also sort of annual, you know, renewal fees a lot of times at the local level. But again, once you have that in hand, you know, working with like a platform like yourself to ensure that compliance is happening on a daily basis is the most crucial thing. And I think that would avoid scrutiny altogether at the state level. Because the state is so sort of buried in application, they really only have time to pursue operators who are just blatantly illegal right now. Now that's going to change, as it should, you know, once the Bureau, you know, gets you know, more well capitalized from the success of this program and tax revenue starts to become a little more meaningful. But until then, you know, do your best, and I think overall you avoid, you know, unnecessary scrutiny from local or state government.
Nice, nice. And thank you for the shameless plug.
Sure.
You know, WebJoint.com, just, you know, stay compliant.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What are some of the biggest legal mistakes you're actually seeing people make? Because, you know, as you mentioned the whole BCC thing, one part of me is like, wow, like, I can't believe it.
Sure.
And the other part of me is kind of like, I think we kind of brought this onto ourselves by not following the rules to begin with, you know what I mean?
Sure, absolutely. I think, you know, specific to operators, and maybe we'll touch on this a little later, is I see 2 things. You know, I see people chasing like shiny objects, right, and not really focusing on executing a specific vision on a specific timeline, or not holding themselves or their teams accountable to executing things efficiently in order to get to a specific goal. You know, there's so much wonderful activity in this space and so much interest in this space that I see a lot of clients pursuing a license and then will just completely get distracted with an entertainment, you know, opportunity, or, you know, having a celebrity ambassador attached to their brand, or chasing something that's a little more far-fetched. And in the interim, they're not executing the whole reason why they had that conversation in the first place. So I see a lot of sort of chasing shiny objects, and I see a lot of people, you know, for better or worse, you know, we call it getting married before you date, right? You know, a lot of times the culture of our space sort of requires operators to partner up with investors, and a lot of times those 2 communities of people come from very different cultural, political, social backgrounds. You know, investors see an operator who's successful and see dollar signs. Operators see an investor who can stroke a check, and they think that's their easy path to, you know, being successful operationally. Making sure you you know, can work and have spent some time, working with, your potential partner is crucial, because I wouldn't say more often than not, I would say more than you might realize. Almost 50% of the time, these projects fail not from, a lack of, not submitting their application or not being able to get the funds ready for their application, but because the two parties that are sort of coming together to run this business ultimately are not a good fit for each other. And a partnership breakup, particularly once you have assets in hand collectively, can get very expensive. It's like a messy divorce.
Got it, yeah. So it's not just, money's money and that's important.
Right.
You need that to operate the business, but you should also make sure you can work with that person and there's a culture fit.
That's so crucial, because in our space right now, look, if you have a good business plan and you have a quality team, and you have a very focused vision as to what you want to achieve, you can get money from a lot of places now, right? I mean, the industry is white hot, right? Whether it's hemp or cannabis, right? This is our moment in time, right? And the even like more, right? We're seeing more like corporate and high level family office and even private equity group investments coming into the space, whereas 7 to 10 years ago, it was simply high net worth individuals investing into the space, right? There wasn't any institutional money coming in.
For sure.
We're starting to see that change, and that just emphasizes the importance of that cultural fit. You can go get a check in a lot of places now, so just make sure that check is not only a good culture fit, but ideally has a complementary value add, to your business, right? If you want to start like a house of brands, right, and you want to like run a white label business, well, it would be great if your investor could not only write a check, but came from the consumer packaged goods space, in food and beverage, right, and already had experience in developing, selling, marketing, advertising brands successfully, right? And so finding that culture fit and finding that complementary value add, just a check writer is not that hard to find these days, right? Particularly if, as an entrepreneur and owner of your business, you're out there in the marketplace, going to WebJoint events, networking with other people, meeting other people in the industry. I haven't seen a single operator client of ours or any client of ours who sought investment. If they were working hard to achieve that and getting out there and networking and had all their ducks in a row specific to presenting a business plan, presenting an executive summary, having a quality team in place, I haven't seen any one of those operators fail to get investment. So now's the right time. It's important to find that fit.
I want to transition this into more of like delivery specific questions,
Sure.
Because we are a delivery specific company.
Yes.
We actually kind of reached out to our clients and we asked them, like, if you're in front of a cannabis lawyer, what
Sure.
kind of questions would you want to ask?
Sure.
So let's do it.
Have at it. Let's go.
All right. So to set the stage, can you explain the different types of delivery business models that are happening right now
Sure.
legally?
Sure. So sort of two main models that we see, more of a depot model where, essentially, products are aggregated at a non-storefront retail licensed facility. Cars will go and, pick up products on sort of a per order basis or more of a 5 orders or less basis. The other model is having that same depot, but then putting the maximum amount of product that's sort of legally allowed in that car at one time, which is $5,000 of product, and then going out and sort of being a true mobile dispensary, right? Once you get orders, then you can actually go and that ends up being more efficient, but delivery, as you guys know more than anyone, just boils down to logistics. And so for some of the larger operators, they actually prefer the first model because it seems less inefficient, but just because of how they have their sort of systems internally set up, that's the best way to be compliant, because it can be challenging if you've got a bunch of product in your car that isn't already sort of allocated to a specific customer. That opens the door to potentially loose activity, let's call it. So it really just depends on the specific operator, but those are the two main models.
One of our clients wants to know where they could legally actually deliver product to. Does it have to be a residential address that matches the ID of the person, or?
Great question. So actually, that's wide open, which is wonderful for the opportunity for delivery drivers. Where it's expressly prohibited to deliver cannabis to in any way. Lands owned by the federal government or public lands as they're defined. Also sort of somewhat obvious sensitive use areas, we call them, right? Like schools, churches, kindergarten places, any place that there's, the main purpose of that area is religion or, children. Those are prohibited from delivering to. Other than that, delivery drivers are able to deliver, to basically anywhere, right? And so, certain clients of ours will only, deliver to residential houses specifically, but there's nothing prohibiting you from, being at a concert downtown LA, stepping out, and ordering, cannabis to be delivered outside of the club that you're at, nice. Right? And so for the most part, I think that really allows. That's the intent of the program, right? That's the intent of the delivery program itself. So
nice.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a good one.
Sure.
Throw you a curveball. One of our clients is asking, they have several elderly clients who have expired valid government IDs because they don't drive anymore, they don't travel, so they're not renewing it. What do they do?
They should definitely ensure that whoever they're delivering to, has a valid form of identification. So unfortunately, for that client particularly, they need to ensure that they get some valid form of ID. Now, it should be a California state ID. That said, I'd have to look into whether or not something like a passport would be acceptable. I would imagine it would be, but as long as you're over the age of 21, that should be fine. But that's not specific legal advice.
None of this is legal advice. Go get your own lawyers. And what type of specific type of license do you need to be able to actually deliver?
Sure. So you need it's a type of retailer license, right? There's traditional retail, brick and mortar, and then there's non-storefront delivery or non-storefront retail, which is the delivery license. So in order to deliver, actually to consumers directly, you need that non-storefront retail license.
Are there any other license types, like how about if you have a micro business?
Sure. So absolutely, yeah, that's a good point. So, micro business license is sort of 3 licenses in one. You could also have a micro business license that could be cultivation, distribution, and non-storefront retail, or you could have traditional retail and non-storefront retail and something else like distribution as well. And so there's sort of 2 ways, you could effectively deliver with either a micro business that has a non-storefront retail license or a separate non-storefront retail license by itself.
Got it. So the micro businesses are like a 3-in-1.
Correct.
So depending on which 3 you picked, you may or may not be able to deliver.
Correct.
With a micro business.
Yeah, exactly. So if you do have a micro business, the only way you'd be able to legally deliver would be with that non-storefront retail license as one of your 3 licenses in your micro business.
I've been hearing these rumors floating around that the Type 10 business license in LA, which is supposed to be traditionally just brick and mortar, storefront only, they
Sure.
can actually deliver.
Sure. So that's true in cities like LA. If the operator could prove that they were performing that activity and could prove they were performing that activity before they actually have obtained their license. And so in certain cities, municipalities may authorize retailers to also be able to deliver, but again, that's on a sort of city by city basis, and that doesn't apply statewide. And one thing to keep in mind is that even if the city of LA allows you to do that, that's great. At the state level, you'd still need to apply for and obtain a traditional retail license and a non-storefront retail license, because the state doesn't care, as much what the city is allowing you to do. You still need to get that explicit permission, from the state for whatever activities you're doing, So in that case, you need to get both of the retail licenses.
Here's a good one.
Yeah.
If you have one licensed facility,
Sure.
Can you create another hub, quote unquote, elsewhere and use that to store your inventory as well?
Great question. This one I get a lot. This boils down to logistics, right? And the short answer is no. You can't do that without being separately licensed in those other municipalities, right? I've had certain clients ask if they could do that in the same city, and the answer is potentially, depending on what the city allows you to do. A lot of our clients, are looking to, on the distribution side or on the delivery side, are looking to capture as much market share as they should right now. Very sensible. That said, every time you open up a depot or a stopping point that isn't both locally and state licensed separately, right, assuming it's in a different municipality, you're exposing yourself to scrutiny, and that's technically, wouldn't be a legal part of your operation.
And what do you have to say about people that are using, or claim to be using somebody else's license? Sure. And are kind of delivering on their behalf? How do you see that playing out?
Sure. You can actually effectuate that legally if you paper it the right way. So just a management agreement, right? And so a lot of times I'll see that where, one team will come to us that, really has a skill set to be a good retailer, right? And can run traditional cannabis retail, no issue. But they don't have the skill set or the expertise or the logistical background to run a delivery service. So in that case, if that retailer has, both sets of retail licenses and can legally deliver products, they might hire, this other group to actually run their delivery for them. I know this scenario you're talking about. In most cases, that's probably not being done above board the proper way, but there is a way that you can paper that legally with the blessing of the state. In short, you'd have to file some notification forms to the state, just letting them know about, showing them this management agreement and showing them the state wants to vet all the operators and all the people who are, profiting from the sale of legal cannabis and wants to make sure they're not bad actors, right? And so there's a little vetting process there. Probably have to disclose themselves as what we call financial interest holders, right? Which just means you have some part of a business from a financial or operational perspective. So you can do it, but how it's being done a lot of times throughout the state right now isn't above board.
Okay, so that's at least a silver lining. There's actually a way to legally and contractually document that to get that job done.
Yes.
But it doesn't work in the way of hey Jeff, let me just write your license number down.
Oh,
and, no. I'll just deliver.
No, it doesn't work that way. That would be exposing, the licensed entity itself to risk. The other reality is that, anyone who's delivering on behalf of, a licensed entity needs to be an employee, right, of that licensed entity. And so that employee also has to have been vetted and approved by the state themselves.
Got it. And if you're licensed in one city, can you deliver into another one?
Yes. And sort of that is the point of contention right now, for a lot of other cities that, kind of want to keep cannabis out of their city altogether. But right now the current rule is that if you have a delivery license, let's say in San Diego or the city of LA, you could technically deliver products all the way up to San Francisco if you wanted to. Now, logistically, that's a whole different challenge, but one delivery license allows you to deliver to anywhere throughout the state.
Awesome. And so, kind of the argument for that is the whole, elderly people, they need their medicine, or,
absolutely,
disabled people, they need their medicine.
Yes.
And if you don't allow delivery in your city, you're just stopping the good guys, the guys doing it illegally, from doing it because the bad guys don't care.
That's
right?
that's the perfect point, right? Is that the reality is we are so far past the tipping point of cannabis, needing to be meaningfully implemented throughout the state, that if you think banning cannabis is going to prevent cannabis activity, you're wrong, and then you're not getting the benefit of generating any tax revenue from that program, and that just means that the black market will thrive, in your backyard. So it actually has the banning has the polar opposite of the desired effect that, a lot of these cities think it will have.
Exactly. So don't be a party pooper. So you can deliver into other cities.
Yes.
But can you have drivers handing off inventory to one another, kind of away from your licensed facility?
Sure. That is a no. All of those transactions, sort of specific to licensee to employee, has to occur at the facility itself with a manifest. Any type of sort of employee to employee activity outside of that depot would be frowned upon at the state level and at the local level.
So how much inventory can these drivers actually carry in their vehicle? Sure.
Currently the rule is $5,000 of products total in a vehicle, and I'd have to go and sort of double check, but I think the rule is that for the delivery drivers who go and pick up as much product as possible, their limit is 3,000 if the 3,000 hasn't been allocated to specific people, right? So if you go and pick up product, you're capped at 3,000, which is why we're seeing more people and more operators and more delivery services squeeze in that extra $2,000 of product and make sure that every dollar of that's basically accounted for.
So if you're a delivery company, do you have to actually own, the vehicles, maybe the phones, the GPS devices, so on and so forth?
Sure, good question. All of that can be leased, which is wonderful for cost-saving measure. All of that equipment can be leased as long as, both the phone and GPS are, actually present and active and valid in the car. The GPS being the important thing to just track and monitor that activity, but they can be either leased or purchased.
Okay, but they do have to belong to the company. It
Correct.
Can't be, you just using your regular car.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, let me clarify. You can't use your personal vehicle, right? It actually has to be a company vehicle that's either leased or purchased by the company, and all that equipment as well.
So I want to touch on my favorite subject to talk about, the BCC.
Yes, sir.
They're in a lawsuit currently.
Yes.
With a bunch of cities that says what?
Essentially, it says that the intention of Prop 64, wasn't being met, is not currently being met by allowing delivery operators to deliver anywhere throughout the state. The states that are suing the BCC are all states that have banned cannabis activity altogether or almost entirely, and as a result, they don't want delivery companies to be able to deliver products to people who are over the age of consent to receive them in their cities. Their sort of thought process there was, we should have the right to control whether or not cannabis activity happens in our jurisdiction, similar to the way that counties can be dry counties for alcohol, right, and not have retail. But cannabis, coupled with this new age and time of, on-demand services, right? Whether it's food delivery or Amazon or cannabis delivery in this case, people are used to having, that luxury to be able to have things delivered to their door. The reality is that, as this lawsuit proceeds, it's going to be crucial to the success of the BCC's program, given that, to me, the delivery licenses are particularly valuable because that's where our community is now, specific to a consumer on-demand group of people, and that's where it's going to continue to head. And so I do see this lawsuit as being particularly crucial to sort of see how it fleshes out, because if the cities were to be successful, it would really stifle revenue for, most importantly, our clients, right, and the operators of the community, and equally importantly for the state to generate meaningful revenue so we can start going after, some of the more bad actors, because as you and I know, frankly, one of the largest demographic of illegal operators in the state is focused on the delivery side of things, and there are other platforms that sort of facilitate, the process of allowing illegal operators to continue to operate.
Is there anything we could do as as a general audience to kind of help voice our opinion on the matter? Sure.
I mean, if you live in one of these municipalities, I'm not saying your opinion would go upon deaf ears, but the state, you just have to think about it. The state right now, look, they're not trying to, harm anyone with this program. They want it to be a success, and they're doing the best they can. So if you do live in one of these cities that's trying to ban that activity, voicing your opinion certainly wouldn't hurt at the local level. That said, for the most part, these cities are sort of historically, socially, and politically conservative, and as a result, it's somewhat, to be expected, that's sort of the reaction of these cities. I know for Beverly Hills specifically, their sort of comment was, we just want to be able to control who, I don't think Beverly Hills will have cannabis banned forever. Their just concern is, hey, how can we control, who's delivering products on our street and things like that. The counter to that is that, look, these aren't marked cars, right? These are unmarked delivery vehicles. They don't say cannabis for sale, come to this car, right? They're random cars. And law enforcement's entitled to pull people over and check to see whether or not they have a valid license on them. That's what, all these legal operators are supposed to have. So to me, that argument is not a very strong argument. And, yeah, as I mentioned, this is going to be a crucial moment in time to see whether or not, you know, frankly, the business opportunity of the state sort of wins over over these NIMBY people not in my backyard.
Yeah, it's just interesting to watch. It could be frustrating at times.
Sure.
You know, just the BCC tends to change their definition of compliant.
Sure.
Every few months.
Sure.
You know, and just kind of recently, one thing that went out on the subject of brands is, you know, they have to put the California symbol on the cartridge itself.
Sure.
Right. So
Yep.
what are some of the things that caused?
Sure. I mean, that, you know, for some of our clients was, you know, a six-figure, you know, project, if not seven figures, to address and repair. That's certainly frustrating as a representative of, you know, our clients, and knowing that that stifled, you know, revenue for them immediately. That said, I try to keep sort of an even balance of trying to understand the state. The state's not simply trying to stop, you know, our clients and and these cannabis businesses from operating. It's just still so brand new to them, and they're doing the best they can. They need to do a better job of listening overall, because to me that regulation in particular is probably a bit overboard. That said, they are doing the absolute best they can, and you know, I get it. If I'm an operator and I've been following the rules and been working with a group like myself to ensure that we're following packaging, labeling rules to the T, and then we're told while our product's in market that we have to change something that's going to effectively cost us a ton of money, I'm rightfully going to be frustrated. But the appropriate reaction to that isn't to get angry or yell at the BCC. It's to continue to educate and inform the BCC on why that's not a sensible measure, right? Because if you're simply, you know, pointing fingers and yelling, whether it's in this industry or any other world, you're probably not going to get the result you want, right? You have to approach people sensibly with a good argument, and education as to why that doesn't work, right? And that's where this is all going to be sort of a large involved process of time, communication, and, you know, making sure the thought leaders in our community continue to, you know, bestow as much information as they can about what makes for a successful and unsuccessful program, what's working, what isn't working, right? That communication and that dialogue is going to be crucial to continue to ensure that this program will be successful.
Yeah, I feel like everybody in the industry kind of has dealt with that, right? Even us from the software end of things. It's like, yep. Hey, the software needs to do this, this, and this, right. And we spend 6 months building it to do that, and
right.
that,
right.
And then it's like, actually, never mind.
Right.
You know? So.
I usually hesitate to compare cannabis to alcohol because they're so different for so many reasons.
Yeah.
But when I go back in time, you know, when our grandparents, you know, had experienced, you know, alcohol prohibition ending, you know, the black market, just like we're seeing in California right now, thrived in the, you know, decade post-prohibition ending. Right, and so we have to be mindful that this is a process that, you know, we're a year and a half, you know, almost 2 years now, you know, into an experiment that, you know, we first started the first cannabis program in California, Prop 215, was 1996, right? And so we're a year and a half into regulating the largest state of the union, 40 million people with every type of geographical terrain, you know, known to man. This isn't a simple problem to fix, and so, you know, keeping in mind that, you know, it took decades for, you know, sort of alcohol to become a properly highly regulated industry, we're going to see the same thing here. And that can be really challenging and really frustrating for operators, but to me it's really important to know from speaking to the regulators directly, multiple times, like their intent is for this to make this work, and they're doing the best they can, but there are only so many people there, and without tax revenue being generated meaningfully, they can't hire more people, they can't get out there and enforce the illegal activity, and so it's all going to be sort of a, you know, it's all a process, and the more we work together, the more efficient it's going to be, and it's going to roll out more successfully.
Yeah, I hear you.
And I know that's a little idealistic and optimistic to say, but that's the reality of the situation.
For the people that were so patient until the end, I want to talk about white labeling laws and how they can, you know, start their own cannabis brand without actually having a license.
Sure.
And I know that's also one of the things that's kind of flip-flop back and forth.
Yes.
Before. So where does it stand now?
Sure. So, you know, fortunately, again, listening to the consumers or listening to the operators in the space, the state acknowledged that white labeling was going to be inevitable, right? A lot of our clients are sort of white labeling manufacturers or specialists, right? That was their whole business model, right? And so when the rules initially came out, white labeling wasn't allowed. Now at this point, it's sort of the same thing as we touched on earlier, regarding having someone operate under your license, right? You essentially need what we call like an intellectual property licensing agreement. So if you and I build a brand together, right, we're really proud of the logos and the packaging that we've come up with. We want to sell vaporizer carts. Awesome. We take that logo and packaging, we put that into an LLC or an entity of ours. We find an operator who wants to sell, Art and Jeff's vapes, right? And then we might we'll make a royalty based on the sale of those products, right? And so that's all up to negotiation, right? We could make, a royalty on a sale per unit, on a sale based on revenue, and there's lots of there's lots of variables in these licensing agreements, but the reality is you're getting money, based on the brand that you've created. And what's required there at the state level is relatively simple. It's that agreement along with notifying the state that there's another financial interest holder in their license. Now, I've seen a couple operators get hung up on that because they think that means they're telling the state that we have a new owner or we have a new equity participant. That's not it at all. You can be a financial interest holder and not actually own any equity, in that business at all. It's just we as the brand, right, is benefiting from the sale of cannabis products, and we have to be disclosed to make sure we're not bad people.
Okay, got it. So there is a legal way to do it.
Yes.
And the BCC did listen to us.
Yes. See, so that's a great example of how, I would say, during that time when the sort of state was figuring out whether or not they were going to allow white labeling, I probably personally sent 15 emails to the state, right, on behalf of clients, right, and then had our clients do the same thing, and the state listened, right, and so that's a perfect example of where coming together, educating, helping the state understand this isn't people who are trying to start illegal brands and benefit illegally, right, from the license program. These are just groups that are maybe a little smaller, don't have the $250,000 they need to get their own license, and maybe have a smaller brand that they only want to do, $50,000, $60,000 of revenue with. They should be able to participate as well, and there should be a mechanism for them to do that, and fortunately there is.
One last question that I have to ask,
Sure.
that I love to ask. If Lori Ajax was in the room right now, what would you tell her?
I would start off by saying thank you. She's extremely hardworking. She's a wonderful person to talk to. She's doing her best, right? She comes from the alcohol and beverage community and has sort of been thrown into this position of being expected to know as much as people who've been operating in this space for decades in some cases, right? And so she's absolutely doing her best. I would tell her to continue to do as good a job as she can getting out there and listening to the operators, right, and listening to groups like ourselves when we have sort of educated, informative inquiries that are sort of backed by substantive information, right. I would tell her to not worry so much about the naysayers who are saying this is a failure. This is such a monumental, and it's not a failure, but it's been slow to get started, right. They fell short of their tax revenue goals last year, and that's still going to take some time. And so I would just tell her to sort of keep on keeping on to some extent, and try to continue to get as educated as she can on the space, and that I know it's certainly not a job that I'm envious that she has. It's a really difficult position to be in, and yeah, so just keep listening and just keep grinding, and I think we'll be okay.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, that brings us to a wrap. Thanks
Awesome.
so much. Why don't you go ahead, look right into the camera.
Sure.
Plug what you need to plug. I know you have some good news you want to share as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're excited to announce that it's effective right now. We're going to be joining Vicente Sederberg, who is the nation's premier cannabis and hemp powerhouse. Frontera is really going to be bringing a sort of California-focused cachet to Vicente Sederberg's already existing strong California practice. We will now have offices throughout the country: Los Angeles, Denver, Boston, New York City, and Jacksonville. And for our clients and for our perspective, we really viewed this as a necessary pivot to continue to keep up with the growth and the pace of this industry. So we're going from 8 lawyers here at Frontera to 60 plus lawyers at Vicente Sederberg, We're growing our staff from 5 to 35, and we're going to have we have a separate hemp division that's 25 people strong, and I'm going to be really focused on sort of continuing to bridge the entertainment and cannabis worlds in Los Angeles as a partner at that office.
Nice, man. Congrats.
Thank you so much.
And as always, my name is Art. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Art.
And for everything that we discussed today, Jeff and his partners have given us a lot of good information that we're going to include in a bundle, as well as future Connecting Cannabis episodes. Make sure to go to webjoint.com/blog, put in your email, sign up for our mailing list, and you'll get it all in your inbox. Until next time, I'll see you guys later.